Welcome to A Year of War and Peace. I'm your host, Brian E. Denton. A Year of War and Peace is a daily, year-long, chapter-by-chapter reading of and meditation on Leo Tolstoy's epic novel, War and Peace. In these videos and podcasts, you'll be treated to a free reading of one chapter per day of the novel, plus a reflective essay I've written individually tailored to that day's chapter. These readings are offered for free, though if you'd like to support me, you can do so in one of three ways. First, you could purchase my ebook, A Year of War and Peace. It features the entire novel, plus all of my reflective essays, and it's only $2.99 on Amazon.com. You could also become a patron at patreon.com/Brian E. Denton. If you sign up there, you'll receive a sonnet once a month, plus a link to an ebook of my collected sonnets. Finally, if you like, you can make a one-time donation to my PayPal account. The email there is brianedenton@gmail.com. You can also use that email to contact me. I'd be happy to hear from you. Your support is greatly appreciated. Today's reading and reflection is on Chapter 102. Chapter 102. The Emperor rode to the square, where facing one another, a battalion of the Preobrazhensk regiment stood on the right, and a battalion of the French Guards in their bearskin caps on the left. As the Tsar rode up to one flank of the battalions, which presented arms, another group of horsemen galloped up to the opposite flank, and at the head of them Rostov recognized Napoleon. It could be no one else. He came at a gallop, wearing a small hat, a blue uniform open over a white vest, and the St. Andrew ribbon over his shoulder. He was riding a very fine thoroughbred gray Arab horse with a crimson gold-embroidered saddlecloth. On approaching Alexander, he raised his hat, and as he did so, Rostov, with his cavalryman's eye, could not help noticing that Napoleon did not sit well or firmly in the saddle. The battalion shouted "Hurrah!" and "Vive l'Empereur!" Napoleon said something to Alexander, and the emperors dismounted and took each other's hands. Napoleon's face wore an unpleasant, artificial smile. Alexander was saying something affable to him. In spite of the trampling of the French gendarmes' horses, which were pushing back the crowd, Rostov kept his eyes on every movement of Alexander and Bonaparte. It struck him as a surprise that Alexander treated Bonaparte as an equal, and that the latter was quite at ease with the Tsar, as if such relations with an emperor were an everyday matter to him. Alexander and Napoleon, with the long train of their suites, approached the right flank of the Preobrazhensk battalion and came straight up to the crowd standing there. The crowd unexpectedly found itself so close to the emperors that Rostov, standing in the front row, was afraid that he might be recognized. "Sire, I ask your permission to present the Legion of Honor to the bravest of your soldiers," said a sharp, precise voice, articulating every letter. This was said by the undersized Napoleon, looking up straight into Alexander's eyes. Alexander listened attentively to what was said to him, and bending his head, smiled pleasantly. "To him who has borne himself most bravely in this last war," added Napoleon, accentuating each syllable, as with a composure and assurance exasperating to Rostov, he ran his eyes over the Russian ranks drawn up before him, who all presented arms with their eyes fixed on the emperor. "Will your majesty allow me to consult the colonel?" said Alexander, and took a few hasty steps towards Prince Kozlovsky, the commander of the battalion. Bonaparte, meanwhile, began taking the glove off of his small white hand, tore it in doing so, and threw it away. An aide-de-camp behind him rushed forward and picked it up. "To whom shall it be given?" the Emperor Alexander asked Kozlovsky, in Russian, in a low voice. "To whom your majesty commands." The emperor knit his brows with dissatisfaction, and glancing back, remarked, "But we must give him an answer." Kozlovsky scanned the ranks resolutely, and included Rostov in his scrutiny. "Can it be me?" thought Rostov. "Lazarev!" the colonel called with a frown, and Lazarev, the first soldier in the rank, stepped briskly forward. "Where are you off to? Stop here," voices whispered to Lazarev, who did not know where to go. Lazarev stopped, casting a sidelong look at his colonel in alarm. His face twitched, as often happens to soldiers before called to the ranks. Napoleon slightly turned his head, and put his plump little hand out before him, as if to take something. The members of his suite, guessing at once what he wanted, moved about and whispered as they passed something from one to another, and a page, the same one Rostov had seen the previous evening at Boris's, ran forward and, bowing respectfully over the outstretched hand and not keeping it waiting a moment, laid in it an order on a red ribbon. Napoleon, without looking, pressed 2 fingers together, and the badge was between them. Then he approached Lazarev, who rolled his eyes and persistently gazed at his own monarch, looked round at the Emperor Alexander to imply that what he was now doing was done for the sake of his ally, and the small white hand holding the order touched one of Lazarev's buttons. It was as if Napoleon knew that it was only necessary for his hand to deign to touch that soldier's breast, for the soldier to be forever happy, rewarded, and distinguished from everyone else in the world. Napoleon merely laid the cross on Lazarev's breast, and dropping his hand, turned towards Alexander, as though sure that the cross would adhere there, and it really did. Officious hands, Russian and French, immediately seized the cross and fastened it to the uniform. Lazarev glanced morosely at the little man with white hands who was doing something to him, and still standing motionless, presenting arms, looked again straight into Alexander's eyes, as if asking whether he should stand there, or go away, or do something else. But receiving no orders, he remained for some time in that rigid position. The emperors remounted and rode away. The Preobrazhensk battalion, breaking rank, mingled with the French guards and sat down at the tables prepared for them. Lazarev sat in the place of honor. Russian and French officers embraced him, congratulated him, and pressed his hands. Crowds of soldiers and civilians drew near merely to see him. A rumble of Russian and French voices and laughter filled the air around the tables in the square. 2 officers with flushed faces, looking cheerful and happy, passed Rostov. "What do you think of the treat? All on a silver plate," one of them was saying. "Have you seen Lazarev?" "I have." "Tomorrow, I hear, the Preobrazhenskis will give them a dinner." "Yeah, but what luck for Lazarev. 1,200 francs pension for life." "Here's a clap, lads," shouted a Preobrazhensk soldier, donning a shaggy French cap. "It's a fine thing, first rate." "Have you heard the password?" asked one guards officer of another. "The day before yesterday it was Napoleon, France, Bravoret. Yesterday, Alexander, Russe, Grandieu. One day our emperor gives it, and the next day Napoleon. Tomorrow our emperor will send a St. George's Cross to the bravest of the French guards. It has to be done. He must respond in kind." Boris, too, with his friend Zelensky, came to see the Preobrazhensk banquet. On his way back, he noticed Rostov standing by a corner of the house. "Rostov, how do you do? We've missed one another," he said, and could not refrain from asking what was the matter. So strangely dismal and troubled was Rostov's face. "Nothing, nothing," replied Rostov. "You'll call round?" "Yes, I will." Rostov stood at that corner for a long time, watching the feast from a distance. In his mind, a painful process was going on which he could not bring to a conclusion. Terrible doubts rose in his soul. Now he remembered Denisov with his changed expression, his submission, and the whole hospital, with arms and legs torn off, and its dirt and disease. So vividly did he recall that hospital stench of dead flesh that he looked round to see where the smell came from. Next he thought of that self-satisfied Bonaparte, with his small white hand, who was now an emperor, liked and respected by Alexander. Then why those severed arms and legs and those dead men? Then again he thought of Lazarev rewarded and Denisov punished and unpardoned. He caught himself harboring such strange thoughts that he was frightened. The smell of the food the Preobrazhenskis were eating and a sense of hunger recalled him from these reflections. He had to get something to eat before going away. He went to a hotel he had noticed that morning. There he found so many people, among them officers who, like himself, had come in civilian clothes, that he had difficulty in getting a dinner. 2 officers on his own division joined him. The conversation naturally turned on to the peace. The officers, his comrades, like most of the army, were dissatisfied with the peace concluded after the Battle of Friedland. They said that had we held out a little longer, Napoleon would have been done for, as his troops had neither provisions nor ammunition. Nicholas ate and drank, chiefly the latter, in silence. He finished a couple of bottles of wine by himself. The process in his mind went on tormenting him, without reaching a conclusion. He feared to give way to his thoughts, yet he could not get rid of them. Suddenly, on one of the officers saying that it was humiliating to look at the French, Rostov began shouting with uncalled-for wrath, and therefore, much to the surprise of the officers, "How can you judge what's best?" he cried, the blood suddenly rushing to his face. "How can you judge the Emperor's actions? What right have we to argue? We cannot comprehend the Emperor's aims or his actions." "But I never said a word about the Emperor," said the officer, justifying himself, and unable to understand Rostov's outburst, except on the supposition that he was drunk. But Rostov did not listen to him. "We are not diplomatic officials. We are soldiers and nothing more," he went on. "If we are ordered to die, we must die. If we're punished, it means that we have deserved it. It's not for us to judge. If the Emperor pleases to recognize Bonaparte as Emperor and to conclude an alliance with him, it means that that is the right thing to do. If once we begin judging and arguing about everything, nothing sacred will be left. That way, we shall be saying there is no God, nothing," shouted Nicholas, banging on the table. Very little to the point as it seemed to his listeners, but quite relevantly to the course of his own thoughts. "Our business is to do our duty, to fight, and not to think. That's all," said he. "And to drink," said one of the officers, not wishing to quarrel. "Yes, and to drink," assented Nicholas. "Hello there, another bottle," he shouted. All right, so that concludes my reading of chapter 102. I'll now proceed to my reflection on the same. A Year of War and Peace, Day 102. The Alexander Option. So much for cheese-eating surrender monkeys. The French in this novel are completely badass. They're like a bunch of Rambos drawing first blood from everyone they encounter. Just look at what they've done to our Russian friends, including our beloved Prince Andrew. And yet, despite all this carnage, here, after the Treaty of Tilsit, Emperor Alexander accepts Napoleon's peace offering. Nicholas Rostov doesn't understand. He thinks back to the horror of the soldiers' hospital and asks how it's possible to offer such forgiveness. This question haunts him. He cannot find an answer, so, like men of all ages, once rational thought is spent on a subject, he seeks the solution at the bottom of a few bottles of wine. What he finds there is something similar to what we've discussed in our readings of the novel so far, the role of duty in life. "We are not diplomatic officials," he exclaims. "We are soldiers. If we are ordered to die, we must die. If we're punished, it means that we deserve it. It's not for us to judge." Naturally, there are limits, rights constraints, to a soldier's duty. But I think Rostov is on to something nonetheless. With that said, I don't think he goes far enough in his thinking. There's a deeper lesson to be gleaned from the peacemaking in this chapter. We're all a bunch of petite Napoleons, lording about in various degrees of viciousness over our domains. Author Schopenhauer, no great friend of religion, once wrote that the only metaphysical truth of the Old Testament is the story of the fall. In that much, he agrees with Clarissa Harlow when she cries, "Vile, contemptible rogue, whether in poor or in rich is human nature." We are Clarissa's vile, corruptible rogues. We are Pierre shooting Dolokhov. We are the old Prince Bolkonsky insulting his own daughter. We are young Prince Andrew coldly dismissing his wife. We are Nicholas Rostov gambling his money away. We are Helene betraying her husband. Unless we're to give in totally to despair and anger at this fallen state of things, our only option is pity and forgiveness towards friend and enemies alike. Call it the Alexander option. Daily Meditation. To avoid being angry with individuals, you must pardon the whole mass. You must grant forgiveness to the entire human race. Seneca, On Anger, 2. All right, so that concludes my reading and reflection on chapter 102. I hope you liked it. Thanks so much for joining me. Remember that if you'd like to support me, you can do so either by purchasing the ebook, A Year of War and Peace, becoming a patron at patreon.com, or making a one-time donation at PayPal. The links to all that are below. Your support is greatly appreciated. Tomorrow, we will be reading and reflecting on chapter 103. I hope you'll join me. Until then, take care of yourselves and others.